The Rescuers Down Under is a movie released by Disney in 1990, just 1 year after The Little Mermaid, the movie that kicked off the now famous Disney Renaissance, and just 1 year before Beauty and the Beast, one of the most popular movies Disney has ever released and also part of the Disney Renaissance. So how come it is that The Rescuers Down Under seems to have been forgotten by most people despite being sandwiched in between two of the most popular movies Disney has ever released? Well, I think that's because most people misunderstand the movie, often expecting it to be just like the other 9 movies of the Disney Renaissance and coming out disappointed because of how different it is, or they heard it was the black sheep in the first place and go in expecting it to be bad somehow, like some sort of punching bag. But personally, I don't find either viewpoint particularly accurate to the actual movie. You see, The Rescuers Down Under is very different from the rest of the Disney Renaissance movies, but in all the best ways. Greetings, it is I, Rockotar, and I wouldn't mind if you joined me as I take a look through this underrated gem of a movie, which in many ways is even near perfect. I said in many ways, not always. But before we get to all that... What? 1,000 subscribers? Maybe even 2,000 by the time this video comes out. Thanks for all the support you guys have been giving me on all the videos with your comments and likes and everything. You guys mean a lot to me, and I really do mean that. I was definitely not expected to get to that landmark so quickly. I mean, the first real video I uploaded was like a month ago, and I only had like 100 subscribers 2 weeks ago. But anyways, without further ado, the video. The movie begins with what is certainly one of the most impressive shots in animation history. A sweeping, single take spanning about 2 minutes straight, starting with just a simple bug on a leaf. Then it slowly zooms out until suddenly it starts panning straight through the vast outback of Australia, a country rarely represented in animation, might I add, all the way to the house of our soon-to-be endangered kid, Cody. And this is far from the only impressive shot in this movie, and it perfectly sets up the quite honestly massive scale of this movie. And as for the soon-to-be endangered kid, Cody, he's actually a pretty good and likable character. He's smart and strong, but his good heart and innocent nature lead him to messing with things bigger than himself, ultimately causing him to get caught by the villain. But let's back up for a second. Before all that drama, Cody heads out to save an endangered rare eagle. He climbs an impressively high cliff to get there, and while I'm shocked and glad he didn't fall to his death, I want to again reiterate just how impressive the scale of everything in this movie is. Despite the simple story on display, the set pieces and locations are astonishingly epic and grand. Even other rather large-scale, epic-scope Disney movies like The Little Mermaid feel less epic in comparison somehow. Anyway, Cody frees the bird, but she accidentally knocks him off a cliff. But you know, since Cody did save her, she makes sure that he doesn't fall to his death, and gives us quite possibly the most impressive and gorgeous sequence in this entire movie, even more so than the opening. This scene is so good that I don't think there are any words that can properly describe just how good it is. I dare say that it's one of the top 10 Disney animated scenes of all time. But one part of what makes it so good I can definitely put my finger on, and that is the outstandingly good soundtrack. This movie's soundtrack is actually my favorite of any Disney animated movie ever released. It may not have any songs to sing, but the background music is so epic, stylistic, and emotional that it doesn't even matter. Just listen to this. And the quality of the music never drops. It's consistently great throughout the entire film. And I might as well mention another aspect of this movie that I think is better than any of the other Walt Disney Animation Studios films, and that is the animation itself. And I don't know how much of a controversial opinion it is to say that this is the best looking Disney animated movie ever released, but I stand by that. The characters are drawn so smoothly and beautifully that they almost look 3D at some point. But ironically, the other word I would use to describe it is also rough, as they've added this sort of rough texture look to everything in the movie as well. So it's both smooth and rough at the same time, which is a weird statement to say, but that is truly the best way I can describe it. But all I know is that it makes it look really cool, and certainly one of the most stylistic Disney movies ever made. Not to mention, the backgrounds and locations are simply stunning, and the colors used in this movie are beyond the usual painting come to life comments. It's honestly baffling how little credit this movie gets for its jaw-droppingly gorgeous animation. While I do have to admit there are a couple moments when they showcase some cities like New York and Sydney where they decided to use CGI, even though this is 1990, and well, let's just say it looks very dated. No, also in whatever this shot is. Cody do be looking like an Airhead commercial right here. But I do let those slide because it was 1990, and they make up probably 30 seconds or less of screen time anyways. Well, back to where we were. Marahute the eagle finishes taking Cody for a ride and shows him her eggs, whilst also revealing that the father of these eggs is gone. Cody relates to Marahute because he lost his father too and only has his mother now. Marahute gives Cody a golden feather as a gift just before sending him off back on his way home. Or at least that's where he would be heading, if it weren't for that very feather he got as a gift and his good nature, leading to a chain of events that set off the rest of the movie. Cody attempts to free this little mouse guy from a trap, and unfortunately ends up getting caught in the trap himself, though he did save the mouse. And, well, that's when a certain someone shows up and decides to kidnap him. But because he saved the mouse returns the favor by sending a call for help. And wow, is the music during this segment outstandingly good. This might be not only one of the best music pieces in this entire movie, but one of the single greatest pieces of music in any movie I've ever heard. It's just so epic! Do yourself a favor and go listen to the whole thing on Spotify. Or better yet, just watch the movie and hear it in context. After you watch this video, of course. And by the way, did I mention that all of this is just the first 12 minutes of the movie? And I haven't even gotten to a certain character yet. But if you're not convinced that this movie is a masterpiece just yet, well, just keep watching because there are many, many, many more reasons yet to come, including the biggest one of all. So clearly the presentation and opening of the movie are outstandingly good. But what about the characters and story? Well, as for the story, it's pretty simple. Poacher kidnaps boy who knows the location of a rare eagle and tries to make him talk so that he can capture it. Meanwhile, two mice rescuers and an escort head out to save him and prove themselves along the way. Also, some comedic side shenanigans ensue occasionally. And even though the plot is simple, it's still pretty good. It's interesting, engaging, and there's no glaring plot holes to my knowledge. It's definitely a step more interesting than the first film, which is mostly probably due to this film's significantly better pacing. I also like how much more down-to-earth this plot is compared to the first movie, which sounds weird to say since this is the one where a kid rides a giant eagle and a mouse wrestles a snake. Though I think the main reason I find this movie more relatable and engaging is because of Cody's situation. In the first movie, Penny was in a bad spot, but at least Madame Medusa gave her some semblance of care. But Cody's caretaker doesn't give two hoots about him. He literally throws knives at him when interrogating him, and then he locks him up in a cage underground. I just find the danger of Cody's situation much more threatening and realistic. The villain doesn't just want Cody to do something for him, he is asking him to betray his friend and join him instead. It makes us think, if we were in Cody's situation, would we sell out Marahute and join the villain for a potential cut of his profit, or stay righteous and suffer his abuse and manipulation? And speaking of Cody, I mentioned before that I think he's a pretty decent character. He's written just smart enough to be competent at many things, but not so smart or strong that he turns into a Gary Stew. His moments of weakness or seeming stupidity are mainly because he's just a kid, and simply not as strong or knowledgeable as people who have much more experience than him. I also like how his kindness towards saving Marahute at the beginning saves him not once, but twice later on in the movie. I just realized we're 8 minutes into the video, and somehow I haven't even so much as mentioned Bernard or Bianca yet, despite them being the protagonists of the previous film and duo protagonists with Cody in this one. But don't worry, it's certainly not because they are bad characters. Bianca is honestly just okay though, if I'm being honest. But I do like her hopeful, positive, courageous, and quick-thinking personality. When the situations get tough or dangerous, Bianca always holds out hope. She is sort of the heart of the movie, the character that keeps everyone else going, someone to believe in. But if we're being honest, Bernard blows her out of the water with how genuinely great he is. Bernard still has that awkwardness to him from the first movie, being timid, slow, careful, and even sometimes a bit weak. But that never stopped him from still putting his life on the line to help save Cody. During all this, he simply wanted to just propose to Bianca and marry her, though he was afraid that he might not be good enough. But once he realizes that ultimately he was the only one seeing himself as not good enough, he at last learns to overcome his weakness and mouse up. Eventually, the thing he was so afraid to do, that being proposing, seems like an easy task compared to everything he just went through. Also, I guess I should mention Bernard and Bianca's guide in Australia, Jake, who is certainly a character who exists in this movie. For real, he is a pretty inconsequential character, all things considered, but he does help motivate Bernard to prove himself, so I guess he does have a small purpose. Otherwise, he's just kinda there, being inoffensive and just okay. He doesn't detract from the movie in any way, and because his role is so small, he doesn't have that much screen time either. Most thankfully of all, though, is that they didn't use him to force in a bad love triangle subplot into the movie. I dread the very idea of that. All pretty good characters so far, but for every protagonist, there is a comic relief. I kid, Wilbur is great. In actuality, despite the memes, most Disney movies actually have pretty decent comic relief characters, and Wilbur is definitely not an exception.
Albatross air, a fair fare from here to there. You get it? A fair fare, it's a play on never mind.
His comedy works quite well because it isn't forced or overplayed. While some of the jokes are over the top, they aren't bad or annoying kind of over the top jokes.
He was kidnapped.
Kidnapped? Oh, that's awful. Nobody's gonna take a kid's freedom away while I'm around. Nobody, you hear me?
The part when Wilbur gets sent to the hospital because he breaks his back is pretty hilarious. I like how they make you think Wilbur is overreacting at first, only for the doctor to actually be genuinely insane. Ultimately, Wilbur fixes his back by accident, and at the same time, the mad doctor poetically gets what he deserved. Comedic genius. I love how Wilbur is terrible with the ladybirds and causes them all to fly away, yet simultaneously, he ends up being the best mother of all. The final shot of the film featuring Wilbur is simply the stuff of a legend.
Okay, that's it. I'm out of here. This is ridiculous. You can't leave me here alone. I'm gone. I am gone.
Wilbur isn't the only comic relief character in this movie, actually. There is also Frank and the attempted escape sequences, which I will admit aren't quite as good as most of the rest of the movie. Frank does unfortunately have a couple annoying moments, and the over-the-topness is sometimes too much with him, unlike Wilbur. But he's not all bad. Some of his jokes are pretty funny, like when the koala guy mocks him, waiting till he is listening before telling him what kind of household object he'll be turned into. Or my personal favorite joke of the entire movie, when Frank has the opportunity to get the keys but isn't tall enough, so what does he get to stand on? The lid of a box. Not the box, but just the flat lid, which barely adds any height. Yeah, but overall these prison scenes are just okay. Some of the slightly weaker elements of the movie, and they never really get wrapped up either. Like, we never see any of these guys again once the villain takes Cody away. And I know for a fact that you guys don't want to end up like these animals in the cages, and you can make sure that never happens by clicking the like and subscribe buttons, which give you immunity to poaching traps. I think the time has come. You may have noticed that I have suspiciously not mentioned the name of a certain important character so far. A character so incredibly underrated that he makes the movie itself look fully appreciated compared to himself. My friends, I present to you Percival C. McLeach, the greatest Disney villain of all time. Except maybe Claude Frollo and Long John Silver and a couple others that are still better. But anyways. McLeach is so underappreciated that it physically hurts. This man is one of the most wildly entertaining characters that I have ever seen in any movie. He somehow finds the exact perfect balance between silly and comedic and dangerous and intimidating. Whenever Cody tries to stand up to him, he becomes a truly despicable monster. But most of the time, he's just a sarcastic, easily annoyed sleazebag who is always a hoot every second he's on screen. McLeach's presence is insane. You can feel this man radiating from beyond the screen. And did I mention how he has an incredible design? He basically looks like if Indiana Jones were evil, and I love it. And boy, oh boy, are his facial expressions insane. I swear, there isn't a single frame of him in this movie where he isn't making some sort of amazing and bombastic expression. His facial expressions are so insane that I have an entire folder dedicated to nearly 100 of them. I dare you to find a Disney character more expressive than McLeach. McLeach. His expressiveness also carries over to his many hysterical lines and scenes.
You get a line, I'll get a pole, matey.
Iconic.
Home on the range, where the critters are tied up in chains.
Even more iconic.
I didn't make it all the way through 3rd grade for nothing.
The most iconic yet.
Did you take one of my eggs?
Perfection. Actually, this egg scene is pretty much the definition of why I love McLeach so much. Not only is it simply hilarious to watch play out, but McLeach also showcases his cleverness, as despite being a fairly comedic villain, he isn't stupid either. We get a look inside his thought process, something I always love when movies do, as he discerns the best way to get Cody to talk, and when he finally realizes the best way to make him talk, we see who he really is deep inside, below his light-hearted exterior. Deep down, he is a dreadful and terrifying monster. Everyone is just a tool to be used by McLeach. He treats Cody and all the other animals with little to no respect, mocking the very idea of anyone doing anything about his cruel ways. Even when McLeach seems casual about things, he could flip on a dime to a murderous devil, and it fits perfectly with his expressive personality. He also clearly knows how to put on an act. For example, one scene I often hear get criticized in this movie is when McLeach lies to Cody, but honestly, I have the exact opposite opinion. I actually think this is a great scene, and it makes perfect sense in my opinion. McLeach clearly thought through his lie. He says the lie in just the same way he says anything else in this movie, except for one scene, that being when he lied to Cody at the beginning of the movie, and at that time he did so very poorly and Cody saw right through his lie. But this time, McLeach learned from his mistake and made sure to make his lie as believable as possible, saying it how he talks in general instead of faking his personality. I always love it when we subtly see the villain learn and adapt from their prior mistakes, and this is an excellent and underappreciated example. And also, Cody isn't stupid for falling for McLeach's lie. He's just a kid who is easily swayed by emotional manipulation. He's also afraid that if Marahute really is dead, then her eggs might be abandoned and alone, with no parents of their own. Cody already lost his father, and the thought of those eggs not even having a single parent to raise them was just too much for Cody to bear. So in my opinion, this entire scene actually makes perfect sense, and is really only criticized because the main character fell for the lie that automatically makes it bad. But anyways, McLeach isn't done yet. He heads out after Cody in a monster of a vehicle, which I've scarcely talked about so far, but it surprisingly also adds quite a bit of personality to his character. Just like McLeach's presence, the sheer power of this machine can be felt through the screen, and it stands out in a good way through the use of surprisingly effective CGI. Unlike the CGI for locations like Sydney and New York, McLeach's vehicle's CGI actually looks good, and it fits since the vehicle is a machine, giving it a heavier and more metallic look. And also I just have to mention how creative this sequence of Bernard and Bianca trying to survive on top of the treads of the vehicle is. So anyways, McLeach gets this close to winning, as any good villain ought to, but he is ultimately beaten by something he never expected. He thought so highly of himself, while simultaneously pushing everyone else, even his own pet, around. However, in the end, he is the one who gets pushed, and by the smallest and least intimidating of foes, a mouse. And a mouse who isn't even that brave or strong. But that mouse's heart and mind were in the right place, while McLeach's interests were only on himself. Also, this scene at the beginning of the movie subtly sets up McLeach's literal downfall. A sign that you can usually tell a movie is pretty good is when they set things up like this, and that is part of why McLeach's death is so satisfying. That and of course the terrifyingly massive waterfall that he goes off in sheer horror. Definitely one of the most chilling Disney villain deaths, especially since they linger on this fall for quite a decent bit too. Well, now that I've thoroughly looked through how great the characters, action, comedy, and presentation are, I ought to mention just a few small issues I have regarding this movie which do hold it back from being a true top 10 Disney movie. Well, in fact, these problems aren't anything that actually happens in the movie, but rather what doesn't happen in the movie. We never actually found out what happened to Frank or the other animals that were captured by McLeach, like I said earlier. I mean, I assume Cody went back and released them, but they never show this. Slightly more disappointing than that, though, is that we never get to see Cody reunite with his mother, which felt like it was being set up by these scenes. But these aren't movie-killing problems, just minor loose ends that are implied to be fixed by the ending, but not actually shown. A missed opportunity to be sure, but it doesn't affect my feelings on how great everything else is, so I don't get too hung up on that. I will never understand why some people don't like this movie. It's really good in just about every way. The animation and setting are beautiful and epic in scope, the soundtrack is catchy and inspiring, the characters are great fun, especially McLeach, who ought to be in the Disney Villain Hall of Fame but has been rudely denied just because he comes from a forgotten movie. Though the movie itself might not be perfect, it may actually be, in a lot of other ways, a rare example of a perfect sequel. It does everything a good sequel ought to do. It follows up and further develops the characters in interesting ways. It adds to the world and setting while still fitting with everything established in the first movie. It improves aspects of the first movie which were underwhelming or kind of weak, but it never sticks too close to what came before that it just feels like a cash grab retread. As I said before, The Rescuers Down Under has its own unique style, different from not only the first movie, but every other Disney animated movie ever made. Another sign that this is a truly great sequel is that it can stand on its own without the first movie. Even if you never saw the first Rescuers movie, you would still be able to fully understand this one. All the necessary information about the returning characters is implied by their established status at the beginning of the movie, and their arcs are mostly contained to this movie, so you won't be lost if you don't know who they are. And that might be a part of why this movie is also surprisingly rewatchable as well. For some reason, I'm rarely ever not in the mood to turn this movie on. It just has that rare feel to it that makes it so good you can't get enough. Or maybe it's just me and my potential nostalgia speaking. The Rescuers Down Under ought to be remembered and appreciated more, not just because it's part of Disney's most popular and influential era, but simply because it is a really good, really underrated, masterful art piece of a movie. If you enjoyed this video, why don't you check out my Wreck-It Ralph review, where I explain why it's basically a perfect movie, and also make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of my new uploads. And also share this video with everyone else out there that you know so the movie can finally get the recognition it deserves. And most importantly of all, stay iconic.